The mountain road twisted like a serpent beneath the weight of rain, its slick surface gleaming under the faint touch of moonlight breaking through heavy clouds. Midnight had long since passed, and the forest on either side stood cloaked in blackness. Tall pines swaying in silence, their limbs whispering secrets to the wind. The only consistent sound was the low, steady hum of tires gliding over wet pavement, broken only by the occasional whoosh of water pooling in dips along the road. Daniel Brooks sat behind the wheel of his aging pickup, his hands firm despite the quiet tremble of fatigue in his joints. A retired police investigator with eyes that had seen too much, and a heart weighed down by the ghosts of old cases. Daniel found himself on these night drives more often lately. Sleep came less and less, rest even less than that. So he drove long, winding roads that led nowhere in particular, just to feel the motion of something steady beneath him. Beside him, stretched across the passenger seat, lay Shadow. The German Shepherd was large, noble, his fur sleek and darkened with age. His amber eyes, sharp and patient, kept careful watch over his human. He didn't need to understand why Daniel drove through the night, he only knew to be there. Loyalty had no language, and Shadow spoke it better than most people ever could. The rain thickened, tapping harder against the windshield until the wipers worked in a slow, rhythmic thud thud thud. The heater murmured softly inside the cab. Daniel exhaled, his mind drifting to memories he couldn't quite silence. Then a flash. A branch, thick and jagged, lay sprawled across the narrow bend ahead like a trap sprung by the forest itself. Daniel saw it a second too late. Instinct took over. He jerked the wheel hard to the left, trying to dodge, but the tires betrayed him. The soaked asphalt offered no grip. The truck skidded, rear end fishtailing wildly. For one suspended heartbeat, they floated, and then the guardrail snapped like a matchstick beneath them. The truck plunged off the road, diving down the wooded slope. Metal shrieked, branches cracked, glass exploded, gravity twisted everything, and then, silence. The wreck came to a rest against the incline, half crushed among shattered trees and broken stone. The cab was mangled, steam hissing from the hood. Daniel slumped forward against the wheel, blood trailing from a gash high on his forehead. His chest barely moved, breath shallow, eyes closed. Shadow had been thrown against the door during the crash, a sharp yelp caught in his throat. Dazed and hurting, he slowly lifted his head. His front leg shook beneath him, twisted slightly, but he didn't care. He whined, crawled to Daniel, nudged his shoulder with his snout. No response. He tried again. Nothing. Daniel's body was warm but still, his breath weaker than the last. Shadow's ears perked. Something changed. Pain hummed through his limbs, but something stronger surged to the surface. Instinct. The duty of a protector. The same duty that had once led him through fire and wreckage to find a child. The same duty that now burned again, telling him Daniel needed help, and no one else knew. He limped to the shattered window, where glass hung like broken teeth, then climbed through, dragging his injured leg behind him. Mud sucked at his paws. Rain pounded his back. Thunder rumbled somewhere above the canopy. But Shadow didn't look back. With slow determination, he climbed the slick, uneven hill, claws digging into wet earth, slipping but always rising. The road above felt impossibly far, but he reached it, soaked to the skin, limping heavily. Shadow emerged onto the pavement as the first pale hints of morning bled into the sky. The road stretched in both directions, empty, ghostly. A fine mist hung in the trees, blurring the lines between dark and dawn. Minutes passed, then headlights. A car swept around the bend, tires hissing on the wet blacktop. Shadow barked. He limped forward, tail rising, eyes wide and alert. He stood in the middle of the road, barked again, louder, pleading. The car swerved. A horn blared. The driver barely slowed, whipping around the dog with the screech of rubber and vanishing into the mist. Shadow's heart thumped wildly. He didn't stop. He barked again. He ran a few feet, pain in every step. Another car came. It too sped past, ignoring the drenched, desperate figure in the middle of the road. But Shadow was relentless. He barked. He howled. He limped in front of every approaching vehicle, tail flicking, body shaking, his voice rising over the rain with pure urgency. His eyes locked on every windshield, pleading for one person to see more than a stray. And then, at last, just as dawn began to press back the darkness and color the world in blue-gray light, salvation appeared. Flashing red and blue lights pierced the fog. A police SUV rolled carefully down the road, its tires crunching over fallen branches. Inside, Officer Jenna Lee sat behind the wheel, alert but relaxed in the rhythm of her early patrol. She scanned the road ahead, looking for washed-out shoulders or debris. Then movement. Out of nowhere, a German Shepherd emerged from the side of the road, covered in mud and soaked to the bone, eyes wild with need. He ran directly at her vehicle, not in fear but in purpose. Officer Jenna's brows furrowed. She eased her foot onto the brake. Something about the dog, the way he moved, the desperation in his expression told her this wasn't an accident. This dog was trying to tell her something, and she was ready to listen. Vehicle shadow jumped onto the hood, paws humping against the glass, his eyes methers. They didn't blink. What the Jenna muttered, putting the SUV in park. She opened the door cautiously. Easy buddy, what's going on? Shadow didn't hesitate. He gently bit down on her jacket sleeve and tugged. Jenna's instincts kicked in. This wasn't just a stray. There was something deliberate in the dog's actions, something desperate. Okay, she whispered, crouching. Show me. Chat let go and took off, glancing back to Maxer. She followed. Jenna grabbed her radio and flashlight. Heart-pounding. Ash jogged after him. The rain had eased slightly, but the forest ahead was still dark and foreboding. She didn't know where this dog came from, but something inside her said this was serious. And she was right. Shadow led Jenna down a narrow mudslick path just beyond the tree. Her boots sank slightly with every step, but she kept pace, her flashlight beam bouncing through the musty darkness. The deeper they went, the more unease crept into her chest. Then she saw it just ahead, a shadow Guardel. Her breath caught. She ran beyond the break in the rail. Her flashlight flicked over twisted metal. Daniel's pickup truck, barely visible, resting sideways in a ravine. Smoke curled from the crushed hood. Brokenless shimmered in the early light. Oh my God, Jenna whispered. Chat was already scrambling down the incline. Jenna followed, sliding on the wet slope, grabbing branches for balance. When she reached the wreck, Shadow was already at driver's side, barking and pawing at the door. Inside, Daniel was slumped over, unconscious. Blood matted his hair and his breathing was ragged. Sir, can you hear me? Jenna called out, tugging the door. It groaned but didn't budge. She pulled harder. Shadow whimpered, pacing in tight circles, tail low and ears back. Jenna grabbed her radio. Dispatch this. Ice Officer Lee. Got a single vehicle crash, one adult male unconscious, severe injuries. Location Highway 6 near mile marker 214. Questing immediate EMS response. The static crackled. Then copyeth that. Officer Lee EMS en route. Jenna looked down at Daniel again. Something about him felt familiar. Then she saw a faded badge tucked into his shirt pocket. She blinked. Daniel Brooks. She murmured, Yorick, retired C. Shadow pressed his head gently against Daniel's arm, never leaving his side. When served minutes later, Jenna made Sorthy handled Daniel with care as they lifted him into the ambulance. Shadow refused to stay behind. He barked, pushed past the paramedics, and leapt in after his friend. Jenna didn't stop him. She just watched, amazed. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a bond unshakable and unspoken. The emergency room door slammed shut as paramedics rushed Danielle inside. Shadow tried to follow, but a nurse gently blocked his path. I'm sorry buddy, you can't come in here. The Germancheford stopped, panting heavily, his fur dripping onto the cold hospital tiles. Hestered at the closed doors, unmoving. Hissers lowered, his eyes fixed on the tiny gap beneath the frame, as if willing his gaze to penetrate. Fuel time blurred. Nurses and doctors passed by, glancing at the soaked dog sitting stiffly in the hallway. No wondered move him. No one had the heart. Shadow remained there for hours. He didn't whine, he didn't bark. He just waited, silent, alert, soaked to the bone. Some staff whispered among themselves. The man inside, Daniel Brooks, had no listed family, no emergency contact. His condition was critical. The surgeon said had less than 48 hours to undergo a complex operation. To save his life bother was a problem his insurance had expired, and the hospital couldn't prist without coverage or funding. Shadow didn't understand words, but he felt the mood, the hush, the tension. Data wasn't just waiting, he was absorbing everything. The hurried footsteps, the hushed conversations, the fleeting glances among the nurses, it all weighed heavily on him. He couldn't understand their words, but he understood the energy in the air, and it frightened him. There was fear here, doubtfulness. He paced in small circles, pausing every few steps to stare back at the emergency room doors, ears twitching at every distant voice. His body trembled not from the cold, but from something deeper, the fear of losing the only person who had ever met home. To him, Shadow let out a soft, strangled whine, a sound that carried with it all feelings. He couldn't say he was just a dog, but in that moment, he knew something was very wrong. Every now and then, he'd lay his head on his front paws, only to jolt up when a doctor passed by, hope flickering in his amber eyes, only to fade again. The horse dragged on. Shadow, wet and trembling, never left his post. By midday, the hospital had quieted, but the tension hadn't lifted. Doctors spoke in low tones, nurses exchanged glances, and the word uninsured passed between lips like a death sentence. Shadow still waited. He hadn't eaten, he hadn't moved far from the emergency doors. His coat had dried some, but his body trembled from stress more than cold. Now, every time a door creaked or footsteps echoed, he perked up, then lowered his head again. When no news came from behind the nurse station, Sarasha, a young nurse with kind eyes, observed him closely. She had seen how he had jumped into the ambulance, how he hadn't let anyone near his owner without bang. There was something extraordinary about this dog. She overheard two senior nurses talking near the break room. There's a charity drive happening in the East Wing this afternoon. Volunteers for some donors, but this patient Daniel, he has no one, no family, no way to on the list. Sarah looked at Shadowwagon. He was staring directly at the nurse's ears, slightly forward, body tenses. If he understood. Shadow stood up suddenly and trotted toward the hallway, sniffed the air, then turned and paced back, anxious. He whined softly, then barked in sharp, urgent. No one reacted. He barked again, louder still. Nothing. He circled, stopped, stared at the humans around him. Sarah's heart tightened. She stepped forward slowly. "You're trying to help him, aren't you?" she whispered. Shadow looked up either, and she knew. She grabbed a towel, dried his back quickly, then clipped a spare leash to his collar. "Come on," she said gently, "I'll take you there." Shadow didn't hesitate. His claws clicked across the tile as he followed her down the corridor toward Hope. The East Wing off the hospital buzzed with quiet activity. Volunteers handed out brochures, journalists scribbled notes, and a few photographers captured scenes of careful donors and hopeful patients. Then, through the crowd came a soaked, dirt-speckled German shepherd on a leash, gently by Nurse Sarah. Conversation shushwed, heads turned. Chad stopped in the center of the room. His chest rose and fell quickly. His eyes scanned the faces around him, pleading, desperate. "He's not just a dog." Sarah began stepping forward, her voice shaking slightly. "Hesaved his owner's life ran into the road to stop a police car, brought help, and no, his owner is in critical condition, but he doesn't have insurance, no family, no support." The room fell silent. People watched. Shadow stepped forward, letting out a low, mournful whine. His eyes locked with a woman sitting nearby, then a man with a camera, then another stranger, and in that moment, without understanding words, they understood him. Journalist named Mikkel Chen stood eyes wide with emotion. "Tell me everything," he said to Sarah. "This story needs to be heard." Within minutes, a photo of Shadow sitting beside Daniel's hospital bed was posted online. The caption read, "He saved his human, now his human needs saving." The image spread like wildfire, hundreds of shares, then thousands comments poured in. "That's Daniel Brooks. He saved my sister years ago. He was the officer who pulled me from that burning wreck. If anyone deserves help, it's him." The hospital's donation alert kept pinging through. Thieving $5 here, 50 there, then commended some in the thousands. It wasn't just the money that moved people, it was the memories. The former firefighter wrote, "Daniel Brooks dragged me out of a collapsed house 10 years ago, never forgot his face." A young woman commented, He stayed by my side after a car crash until help arrived. I was 16. He made me feel safe. Each donation carried a story. Each story was a reminder Daniel had spent his life saving others. Others were saving him. Doctors watched in disbelief as the charity account climbed past the required amount. Nurses exchanged relieved smiles. The surgical team prepared without delay. And through it all, Shadow remained close. He sat outside the operating room, eyes fixed on the door, tail still. Even when others tried to move him, he refused. He'd done his part. And now, he was keeping watch. Surgery took nearly 5 hours. When the doors finally swung open, the surgical team emerged exhausted. Beautiful Dr. Lee, the lead surgeon, pulled it off her mask and smiled. "He made it," she said quietly. Shadow, who had been lying still outside the operating room all night, stood immediately. His ears perked, his tail moved slightly, his eyes never left the stretcher as Daniel was healed past. Daniel's face was pale, beautiful, breathing, fighting. Shadow followed endlessly as they brought Daniel to recovery. Nurses tried to keep him out but eventually gave in. He wasn't causing trouble. He just wanted to stay. Over the next 3 weeks, Daniel slowly regained strength. His ribs healed, the swelling in his head subsided. The first time, he opened his eyes and saw a shadow curled at the foot of his bed. He smiled faintly and whispered, "You stayed." Shadow lifted his head and placed a paw gently on Daniel's arm. From that moment on, they were never apart. Doctors and staff often paused in the hallway, watching in quiet admiration as the German Shepherd fetched water bottles, nudged the call button, or simply lay beside Daniel, offering warmth and comfort. Shadow became more than a dog. He became a symbol, and Daniel, once broken and unsure, began to believe in life again. 3 weeks later, Daniel was discharged from the hospital. The sun felt warmer then. He remembered the air clearer, the world somehow quieter. He sat on his porch, a cup of tea in hand, as Shadow lay beside him, head resting on his foot. Birds chirped in the trees, and for the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to simply breathe. He'd almost died, but instead, he was here, alive, because of a dog who never gave up. Daniel looked down at Shadow and smiled. "You didn't just save my life," he said softly, "you reminded me how to live it." In the quiet days of recovery, a sunlight filtered through the hospital windows, and nurses came and went with soft footsteps. Daniel had time to think. By the time he returned home, a decision had already grown roots in his heart. He begun volunteering at the hospital, helping patients who had no one to visit them. He worked with community groups supporting low-income families with medical emergencies. He shared his story not for pity, but as proof that hope can be born from the unlikeliest places. Shadow was always by his side wherever Daniel went. Shadow followed not just as a companion, but as a reminder that life was fragile, that loyalty was powerful, that one act of love, selfless and instinctive, could ripple through acity. Years passed. The porch where Daniel once sat with his tea became a familiar sight in the neighborhood. Children will ride their bikes by, waving excitedly at the old man with the gentle eyes, and the graying German Shepherd, who still stood proudly even as age slowed his steps. Daniel had become something of a legend, soft-spoken, wise, always listening. Shadow, though slower, still greeted visitors with a gentle wag of his tail, always at Daniel's side. Every weekend, local kids would stop by after school. They'd bring stories of scraped knees, classroom pranks, new friendships, and schoolyard secrets. Daniel would laugh softly, eye sliding up, while Shadow rested his chin in someone's knee, soaking in every word like a seasoned listener. Parents in the neighborhood never worried. "He's with Daniel and Shadow," they'd say, as if those names alone meant safety and warmth. The bond between man and dog had grown deeper, quieter, but no less strong. And then, one quiet autumn afternoon, the porch fell silent, the tea went cold, the rocking chair didn't creak. Daniel and Shadow lay side by side, wrapped in a gentle slumber from which neither would wake. It was peaceful, it was together. The neighborhood mourned, but not with sorrow alone. They told stories, lit candles, painted a small mural at the park. A man with kind eyes and a dog with annoying gaze. Generations later, children still tell the tale of a loyal dog named Shadow, of a man named Daniel who on forget how to live, and then remembered bouquets of